Okay, this video will start in a second.
Just making a video for YouTube. Part of the title of this video will be word mapping. Mainly, I'm going to talk about acronyms. Briefly talk about Gregg shorthand. Briefly talk about American Sign Language. Briefly talk about the major system, and maybe talk about flipping it back. The reason people struggle so much with the English language is because we have 44 phonemes made up by 26 letters. Now, my opinion, and a lot of, let's say, other people's opinion, we should have 44.
I meant to say speech pathologist there. I'm voicing over this video because I don't have the equipment to cut stuff out. It was almost good enough, but there was a few flaws in it, so I'm just voicing over certain things, and I want to touch up certain things. Okay, start it back up.
Or symbols. Not everybody agrees with that. There was
basically just we have 24 letters with 44 phonemes, and that's crazy in my opinion. That's the only point I was making. Okay, I'm going to start it up.
The push to remake the English alphabet to make it make sense, at least the first 3,000 words in it. You want to know these, if you want to function in a society where you don't have to do labor all the time. You want to at least know the first 3,000. But it's very hard because of what I just said, because of that statement. 44 phonemes made up by 26 letters. That's crazy. All right. Now, I kind of discovered this by accident.
Another way of saying that is Jerry Lucas was one of my first teachers, and he wrote a book called Ready, Set, Remember. So I got his second book called Ready, Set, How to Spell, and it gave me the idea to acronymatize every single two letters in the English alphabet. For example, registered nurse. I'll repeat that a lot throughout this video. Or let's say Ohio State. Or let's say time trial. Or let's say shortstop. Or let's say bottom bracket related to bicycles. I'm going to start it back up.
Let's just say a word like cemetery. I would just say Eleanor's E&E Tavern. I mean, the rest is easy how to spell. Or another word that's in the top 200 most commonly difficult words is calendar. I would just say Diane Sawyer's anti-reflective coating is going to come on the date on the calendar.
All I mean there is the only hard part, at least for me, for the word calendar is DAR, and you could easily see how a 6-year-old or a 6th grader would spell it DER.
You wouldn't want to miss that because she's one of the most attractive women in the world. Okay, so what I started doing with the help of other memory experts, I just came up with simple acronyms for each two-letter combinations, which is a lot of work. 26 times 26. Cocaine Anonymous, Central Broadcasting, Cross Country. I'm assuming a lot of people would use that. Carbon fiber. You can see my bicycle background.
And I'm going to jump in there. Another thing you can see, why do I use center equator? Because I often travel to Florida. Even a word like Central Broadcasting here, CB Radio, I live in an industrial area. Okay, so, I know a lot about CB radios, and I had some family members who were truck drivers as well.
Cast iron, Calvin Jones, again, another bicycle mechanic. Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace took that over somewhat, but I'm sure people still use that from time to time. And a lot of times I'll recycle them. For example, let's just say AR. I use anti-reflective coating, but I probably would use Akron Railroad, and then BR is Berea Railroad, CR is Columbus Railroad, DR is Dayton Railroad, etc., etc., etc. All right. So then I came up with this. You know, you see right there with Burger King.
I'm just showing you a simple alphabet list, you know, from the letter B. There's nothing complicated here. My one friend always teases me that Baker Mayfield's no good, you know. I mean, he kind of came back from being no good to being pretty darn good as far as I'm concerned.
Baker Mayfield, Bluetooth, Bob Seger, again, Berea Railroad, as I said, British Petroleum, bringing young...
See, that's a great example of one that's done for you already. See, normally what I do for any, you know, the first, and I'll say this throughout this video, I automatically go to Bedford, Ohio or Berea, Ohio. So I would just say a British Petroleum in, let's say, Berea, Ohio. And that would make sense based on, you know, my location. The Browns used to practice in Berea, Ohio. And if you don't live close to there, you'd have to get gas. You know, I usually triple these up, you know what I mean? In other words, the story has a lot to it. For example, you know, Brigham Young University. Generally Goodyear tires, so I would say Berea year tires, you know, and I generally when you send your kids away to college, particularly if you have a daughter, you would want to make sure that she has new tires on her car. That's all. That's the story, you know, and then the more information you can circle or let's say create a you know, magnetic field around that acronym, the more you can use it in various ways. But that's a little bit beyond the scope of this video.
University. A lot of times I'll use airport for that first letter. All right, so that's done.
What I meant there, I use airport for the second letter of the first A after the first letter. So in other words, you know I said Cocaine Anonymous, but I would use Cocaine Anonymous that meets at the Columbus airport, let's say. I'm going to fire it back up.
And I'm not going to show you D because I scribble this stuff out too much, but, you know, dollar.
That's just another alphabet. All the D's, D-A, D-B, D-C, D-E, D-F.
General, how could you miss that? And then DQ, I'm assuming you'll use Dairy Queen. Okay, a lot of them are done already, like Registered Nurse or Ohio University. Okay, and then what I started doing as I listened to other trained, highly skilled people, they recommend using PAO, Person Action Object, which is very simple, you know, subject, verb, object, you know, like let's just say Diane's blue ball.
That would probably be an adjective there, but you get my point. You know, as I started going through my progressions, you know, I'll just level with you. What I used to do before I knew this, I knew Greg's shorthand, okay, and I knew the major system. So I would look at a word and turn it to Greg's shorthand and then use the major system, and I could almost always get an A. But then I developed this system where I said, hey, why don't I just acclimatize the whole darn alphabet, and then I don't have to convert it from Greg's shorthand back to the answer. Now you might be thinking to yourself, well, why don't you just sit down and study the old-fashioned rote method? Well, I do. But again, you're talking to someone who got a 98% on his anatomy and physiology final. I'll mention that again. And I also walk through, roughly speaking, college statistics and other super hard classes where I was competing with the top 20% in the world, and I walked away with the highest grades in the class with no problem. So basically all I'm saying, what the pros recommend is always starting with the person or place. And of course I listened to what the pros said, because why wouldn't you?
Say Diane's Red Railroad. Okay. So I came up with a few alphabet lists. This is going through the years. I've been at this game for over 20 years. But right there, AutoZone, you know, and I really like that crankshaft, you know, and right there, V, valves.
See, what I try to do, I try to lock stuff in that makes sense. You know, if I have an alphabet list of auto part repair places, what could be a better name than Val's Valve Train Repair? You know what I mean? Or crankshaft. I mean, what could be more, let's say, synonymous with an engine than a crankshaft? Now, I don't use this. I'm just giving you the ideas. I use automotive cars, much like the ancients used animals because they had animals in front of you. I live in an industrial area. I see cars all the time.
By V, you know, for the valve train, Texaco, Sunoco, you'll recognize some of those. Obviously, Meineke, O'Reilly's Auto Parts, etc., Penske. Okay, I got an alphabet list of last names, which I'm not going to show you. I've got an alphabet list of lathes. You can tell my tradesman background. You know, Atlas Lathe, Brown and Sharp, Capstan, Davenport, Feller, Harbor Freight Lathe, I-Beam Lathe, a Junkyard Lathe, Kimber, Logan Lathe, Monarch Lathe, etc., etc.
See, the only point I'm trying to make here, folks, is if you're like me and your first letter can only be a person or place, so you know, and I'll talk about this in a second. Ann lives in Akron, Beth lives in Berea, Chris lives in Columbus, blah blah blah. So your second letter, assuming the acronym's not going to supersede the story, which it often does if the acronym's more powerful in your neural network. But the point I'm trying to make is you get to pick your own alphabet list. You know, and as Dr. Anthony Mestivier would say, is don't follow my system or anybody else's system. Follow your own system. So you got to come up, you know, how you're going to sequence a word out. That's all up to you. And it's got to be meaningful.
Matthews. Okay. Now, I pretty much only use like 5 alphabet lists, but I'm just giving you the ideas, you know. Boxing Day, Dingus Day, Fat Tuesday, Halloween, Independence Day, blah, 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 blah. Valentine's, St. Patrick's Day, Ohio State Day. Okay, alphabet list of tools. Like I said, I rarely use these. You know exactly which ones I use. Automotive, you know, but we're not talking about that right now. Okay, air gun, bandsaw, circular saw. That's a carpet kicker, by the way. Sawzall's intentionally spelled wrong. Yamaha generator.
It should be called a knee kicker, but a lot of guys have blown their knees out on that, so we'll have a moment of silence for that. I'm going to start it back up.
All right. And incidentally, what's the most powerful tool in the world? An extra hand, an open hand.
Incidentally, with that word open, Odessa would drive an Opel, okay? What would her favorite color be? Orange. You know, and if you have alphabet list of whatever, you know, and you can group them and then grow the, let's say, you know, the nucleus out a little bit, or let's, you know, if you want to say that, and then this way you have other options to go, but that's beyond the scope of this video.
All right. Alphabet list of cleaners. My mother was very specific. She only liked to clean with Comet, and she wanted me to wear Tom McCann shoes and only fly on United Airlines. You can't blame her for that. You know, she wanted good quality stuff. But you'll recognize some of those, you know. Kmart cleaner, Lemon Linda, Murphy's Oil Soap, Wash and Walk. I like that one. I made that up. Purple Power. There's a college, I can't think of the name, but I think they're called like the Purple People Eaters or something. And incidentally, a lot of times I'll just use old and new for a lot of things. You know, like an old Opel for a car and an old new Nissan. All right.
What I meant by that is any alphabet list, even if it's an alphabet list of amusement park rides, I'll just say old ride and new ride. And then same thing with cars, old car and new cars. Same thing with a pack of cigarettes, old cigarettes, new cigarettes. Same thing with animals, an old animal and a new animal.
Enough about that. And don't assume you got to be some super smart person, because sometimes I'll talk to guys and they know so much about the football teams and baseball teams. It's amazing. I mean, you're like, like, I mean, I have no right, like, why don't you use that to advance your career? You know what I mean? But some guys don't, and who am I to judge? You know what I mean? But
I certainly didn't mean that in any kind of, let's say, derogatory way. If you're Amish, be the best Amish you can be. If you're Mennonite, be the best Mennonite you can be. If you're homeless, be the best homeless person you can be. I don't mean that in a necessary a career standpoint. I just mean that in a, let's say, having a seriousness about you. And the main reason I threw in an alphabet list of WW wrestlers is because, like, at least when I was growing up, all the kids knew this. You know what I mean? So if you had a word that started with M, you would use Macho Man, where I would just use Mary in Marysville, Ohio, because that's just the way I started. Leapin' Lenny Poffel, I would use Linda in Lorain, Ohio. Ken Shamrock, I would use Kim in Ware, in Kentucky, Ohio. All right, I'm going to start this up.
This one I rarely use. Like I said, I pretty much use cars, but everybody will recognize that. Roddy Piper. How could you miss that guy? All right. Now this one I would recommend, if you do put together 5 alphabet lists, I would recommend one of them being a color. And notice my trades background, right away. I go aluminum, brass, copper, Delrin.
Or let's say apricot, aluminum, blue, brass, cayenne, copper, dark Daffy Delrin. That's how I would run that, but I'm going to start it back up.
I mean, you could tell the machinist background. I've already mentioned lathes and everything else. And that one's made up. Ford F-150 flat, even though I generally use flax paint. Jaundice, that's like a medical term. Key lime from Key West and Ernest Hemingway. Navajo orange, that one I kind of made up. Zucchini, 13 on 13, obviously, because Z is the 26th letter of the alphabet. This one I do not use.
Meaning 13 plus 13 is 26. I'm assuming you caught that. And even I'll even split some of them 0.5. I do that a lot, let's just say a letter of the alphabet like C. I'll often kick in a number 3, or I'll use Ray Guy for number 8 or John Elway for number 7, things of that nature that coincide with the, let's say, spelling of the alphabet, because it gives me another hook if I need. And incidentally, I'll probably tell you this again. When I look at a word, you see this thumb? That's my acronym. Why? Because that's the most acrobatic digit of your hand. Greg's shorthand. Why do I use that? Well, that's kind of, because it's the shortest finger. Why do I use American Sign Language for the middle finger? Why do I use the major system for the ring finger? Because if you're married, especially this day and age, it's a major decision. And I do hope to be married someday, unlike a lot of people.
But just giving you ideas, for your alphabet list. Cyndi Lauper, blah, 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 Fleetwood Mac, Gordon Lightfoot, Kenny Rogers, Madonna, Paul Simon and Patsy Cline, ZZ Top, etc. All right.
See, Tina in Twinsburg, Ohio, would only listen to Tina Turner, you see, and she might be in charge of time trials if I had a word with 2 T's in it that were right together.
Again, I do not use these because I generally use cars and generally females. I generally use cars and females.
We could just easily say people there.
Right there, Hotel California.
See, Diane Sawyer would stay at Days Inn, but Eleanor Roosevelt would stay at the El Dorado, okay? Whereas Chris would stay at a coastal hotel, and this woman would stay at, and Anne would stay at an Airbnb. Willow would stay at the Windermere. Patricia would stay at the Peaceful Pillow. Let's say Rachel and her friend would stay at the Red Roof Inn. And where? In Richfield, Ohio. What would they be driving? Well, Diane Sawyer would be driving a Dodge Dakota. Chris would be driving a Camaro. Beth would be driving a blue Buick. Ann would be driving an Acura. See, that's where the power comes in when you sit down and take time, let's say 2 or 3 days out of the week, to get a few alphabet lists down, and you don't even have to think.
That's that. All right. Marriott, you'll know that one. Peaceful Pillow, I made that one up. Red Roof Inn, that's a real one. But I recycle a lot of them. Okay, so here we are, 9 minutes in. Why did I spend so much time giving you acronyms? Well, because the thing is, if you use the spelling of the word, the second one, Greg Shorthand, you got to jump. You got to go from the spelling of the word to Greg Shorthand. With American Sign Language, you have to go from the spelling of the word to American Sign Language. Then, if you're going to use the major system, you have to go there. All right, well,
and I'm going to jump in there. It wasn't a bad system when I was younger, but when I started using acronyms, I mean, there was no stopping me. There was no, and believe me, folks, I can knock down those tests so quickly. I've proved it so many times in my life where I've walked away with 96s, 97s%. And, I'm not saying I'm the smartest guy in the world, because when I got my bachelor's degree, I only took 2 classes at one time. But I could compete. Some of my college classes, they intermixed them with master level students. In other words, it was the same class. They just had to do a few more papers and do like a PowerPoint exercise. You see what I'm saying? And they had no idea how I was doing so well. And usually I share, unless it's like a class like anatomy and physiology or medical terminology, where I'm competing against world-class people. And then I really can't share because the stakes are too high. I'm going to start it up. Meaning I don't want to draw attention to myself, especially competing against world-class people.
Using the acronym system, and it's only 26 times 26. That ain't a whole lot. You don't have to jump. There's no jumping. So let's just say a word like stop, right? My first letter can only be 2 things. It can only be So in Ohio or Sue.
I actually did not want to use the company that I used for the first 2 ST acronym. And it kind of threw me off, so I had to jump to the last 2. I'm just throwing that out to you. And incidentally, in Ohio Pile, what type of brand name clothing would you be wearing? You got it, Ocean Pacific. And if you were in Nashville, Tennessee, then you wear North Face clothing. And if your name is Willow, you wear Wrangler jeans. In where? West Virginia. You got it. On the west side, driving a wagon, smoking Winston cigarettes.
So I would say Solon's Tower, Ohio Pile. And let's say the stop was a big test word or word to advance in your career, or just if you want to be sharp. Of course you're going to want to stop at Ohio Pile if you're cycling the Great Allegheny Passage,
And for the first letter that I said I didn't really want to share, I actually told you a fake one just to say something. I worked for that company for over, probably off and on, over 6 years. Those guys were very good to me, okay? And of course I'd want to stop and see my old friends. You see what I'm saying? So even though this word is everyday, let's say common word, stop, go, light, sun, moon, it doesn't matter if it was the most complicated medical word, if it was a word that describes something in welding like porosity or something like that. It doesn't matter. I can I just use the spelling and I just zip through it, man.
Oh, and that when you take a test or anything, it's right there. And I'll explain. Like, it's not. Some people might say, well, I'm not taking any more tests. I'm over 55. Well, at some level, every day's a test. And even where I work, I know all the addresses of the places where I drop the stuff off because I know the major system, which I'll briefly talk about. All right, so you get the point. All right, so let's just do this really quick. Okay, Solon Towers, Ohio Pile. So you say, what does stop mean? Well, I better stop at Ohio Pile because it's a good place to stop, and that's where everybody stops when they're cycling from Pittsburgh to Cumberland, Maryland, or let's say Pittsburgh to Washington, D.C. It's the major stop on the place. I could not get that wrong on the test. And you might say, why couldn't I? And I would simply say, because the word is right in front of me. It's impossible. And if you know how to switch it to Greek shorthand, if you know how to switch it to American Sign Language and the major system, you could pass any test with ease, and I proved it in 1997 in my anatomy and physiology final. I got the highest grade in the class. All right, moving on. There's Greek shorthand for stop. That doesn't do anything for me.
Oh, yes, it does. Oh, yes, it does. I'll show you exactly what I would do. You see, S-T-O-P. I would make that a slide. Crawl up the slide. Let's say put your butt down and go down. And what's going to happen then? You're going to stop. There's the answer. Continuing on.
But the Ohio Pile did, and I would just sequence it down. ALS. I'm not gonna do American Sign Language with.
Oh, yes, I am. Right? I believe this is right. And I did not pre-look. And I haven't looked at, I'm not saying I haven't looked at American Sign Language alphabet, but I believe that's S. I think that's A. Okay? So if someone was giving you a hard time, you're going to put your fist down. And sometimes you do have to defend yourself. And people generally leave you alone if they know you're willing to fight. Okay? So let's say stop was a big medical word. I hope I have that right. I think that's S for American Sign Language. And I think that's T. You could say, let go of my thumb, stop pulling on me. And O, you could say, stop spying on me or something of that nature. Is K like that? Is P like that? I don't remember. But, you could almost use that as a welding in your mind if you're taking a test. There's I think it's called a third finger in welding, and it's similar. So you could say, I don't know, when the weld reaches the point of this measuring device, you need to stop. It'd be enough to trigger you on a test.
My hand, I'm just not going to do it. But that's pretty easy. Like even, I bet you, even if you have no idea what American Sign Language is, I bet you could tell me what that is. And
I'm just referring to a letter C there, by the way.
Just suggesting you learn the alphabet. I'm not suggesting you learn the whole thing. The same thing with Greek shorthand. I'm just suggesting you learn the alphabet.
Keep in mind, folks, when I look at any word, the acrobaticness of the thumb, acronym, Greek shorthand, American Sign Language, and the major system, every word I'll run through that cycle. I generally don't need to. Generally, acronyms is more than enough for me. But if the stakes were high, like anatomy and physiology, or let's say chemistry, or let's say statistics 147, I would make sure all my T's are crossed and all my I's are dotted. Make no mistake about it. I would go through that cycle, and that's why I walk away with nearly perfect scores. And I'm not a great speller, so I had to have nearly perfect scores to offset my bad spelling. And by golly, I did.
Okay, and the major system?
I'm kind of dancing around here. To be honest with you, for stop, I would use 2 because that's what 19 stands for in the major system. And, Bernie Kosar used to carry a tube in his jacket, let's say when it was cold out. So I would just make it that he was praying that the cold would stop. So all stop would mean is that a halt to action. And that's what it means. If you look it up, I would assume. I'm going to start it back up.
019. Well, you could, the way I would do that, because and I'll show you the major system in a second, but stop, S is 0 with the major system, T is T and D, because your tongue touches the tip of your palate. They call that, let's just say, tongue to the top of the palate. That's 1, and sure enough, there's my 1 there. And P and B are lip poppers, which is 9 right there. I would just cross that zero out, make it Bernie Kosar. You could say the buck stops with Bernie Kosar. You know what I mean? I mean, you could say the silliness stopped because he almost took the team to the promised land. You know.
Again, you might be thinking to yourself, this is stupid, because why don't you just study instead of dancing around and converting it to other stuff? Well, again, when you're taking the test and you're, let's say you have average intelligence and you're going to get an 85, why not just use little memory techniques and get a 95? You know, and like I said, I'm not suggesting you learn Greg's shorthand. I'm just suggesting you learn the alphabet. I'm not suggesting you use American Sign Language. I'm just suggesting you learn the alphabet. And even to be honest with you, when I was younger, I couldn't sequence a whole word at the speed of light like I can do now. I just used the first 2 letters. It was enough to get me through.
All right. And the last one, I would not recommend doing this unless you're over 25. Sometimes I will flip it back. You know, let's just say a woman named Patricia that worked at O'Reilly's Auto Part, and then I would just, go Toyota Subaru. But I don't recommend doing that because it's too confusing to the mind. But if you do flip it backwards, it extends the, let's just say the story, which I don't recommend doing that, but in a pinch.
And incidentally, that stop sign I got out of a local newspaper, and I looked it up. I forgot what it's just selling a product. It's not anything I'm trying to promote. It was just stuck. You know how they stick stuff in the newspaper. But anyway, FYI there.
Okay, moving along. Okay, and I'll just repeat what I said here. It's important, it's impossible probably to not mess things up. That's my shorthand for because the word is right in front of you. I cannot stress that enough. Okay.
Again, when you're going to be taking a test, they have to ask you the word, or if you're on a job, like I know all the addresses to where I drop the stuff off when I do deliveries. You think that makes me look good in front of my boss? You're darn right it does.
I talked about that with the experts recommend. You got to come up with your own system, and my system is simply this. My system is the first letter can only be a person or place. So
I know I'm repeating myself here, folks. That's just the way it goes.
Anne in Akron, Beth in Berea, Chris in Columbus, Diane Sawyer in Dayton, Eleanor Roosevelt in Elyria, Ohio, Frank in Franklin, Ohio, Gail in Garfield Heights, Hank in Hudson, Ohio, I in Indiana, Ohio. Let's say
using a person's name. I left the name out. You could use a female name or a male name there. Jay would live where? In Jacksonville, Ohio, not Florida, because I keep everything in Ohio. The woman named Kay would live where? In Kentucky, Ohio. Linda would live where? In Lorraine. Mary would live in Marysville, Ohio. Nancy would live in Nashville, Ohio. Odessa would live down at Ohio State. Patricia would live in Pennsylvania, Ohio.
Generally keep everything in Ohio. All right. And this page, I just told you my system. You got to come up with your own system. My first letter can only be a person or place. That's why I never get confused. And with the acronyms, sometimes it overpowers my other system. This would generally be my last letter.
Or a more accurate statement would be, this will never be my first letter. that can actually be second, third, or fourth. It depends. Like even bus, I would go Bree, Ohio, United States. Or let's say airport. Let me just skip that. Just say a woman that lives, a woman named Patricia that works at O'Reilly's Auto Parts. And I don't want to say that stuff. Some of these companies I don't want to say. Okay, we'll just say Wheel, West Virginia Hospital, E&E Tavern Library, or Dog, Dayton Original Gangster. There I would just use a first last name. There I probably would use Diane Sawyer's ethmoid sinus and then emergency room tower, their recreational vehicle. A lot of times for AI, that's already done for us. Allen Iverson. If that was IA, I would use Irish American. Anytime RR is together, I use Red Railroad or Richie Rich, and things of that nature. I'm going to start it up.
Airport bus circulator. You get the point. You get the point.
See, even hospital, I should have, yeah, okay, there it is. Okay, I did write it. Hospital inside at Home Depot. And then the junkyard store that is by default, or a junkyard by default is also a jewelry store, you know. And let's say, you know, the library in Lorain, Ohio, or the YMCA in Youngstown that happens to have a yellow sign, you know. All right.
Kmart Library, North Pole.
And I actually changed the other one to South Pole. I believe it's Stadium on there, but I would just say a stadium in the South Pole.
You know, you get the point. Okay. Again, I know I'm repeating myself, but it's worth repeating. I'm up to 15 minutes. If you have to know how to spell these words, you have to, I mean, you don't have to do anything. You're an adult. But you have to know how to spell the first 2,000, let's say, I mean, according to this person, and I agree with it, 2,500 to 3,000 words. Again, why is it so hard to spell? Because we have 44 sounds made up by 26 letters, and if you asked AI what would be the best way to clean it up, they would tell you to have 44 symbols. Why we don't do that is a mystery to me. But I know some of the smartest guys in the world, you know, they just, you know, they just can't get that down, because you almost have to lie to yourself, you know, because how could this be an apple, and then in another word it'd be an orange, you know, if a guy,
which is exactly what happens, by the way. I mean, one letter could be pronounced more than one way. You know, that's crazy. And then you look it up in the dictionary and it's pronounced just the opposite way as it sounds. So you don't want to say sound it out, little Johnny or Sarah. You might say story it out or sound it out 70% of the time. It's really crazy. And if you want to advance on beyond the primitive level of, let's say, writing skills, then you'd want to probably lock down the first 5,000 words of the English language and practice the 200 most commonly misspelled words. That'll get you into a form of life where you can survive, let's say, in a white collar world. That, in fact, I would almost say 3,000 would get you. I used to lose a lot of points, especially anatomy and physiology, when I spelled the word wrong. But my grades were so high on the tests, they had, you know.
Did that in the real world, he'd be dead. You can't think a cat's a cat and not a saber-toothed tiger. You better be able to differentiate that, and you better not mess it up. You know, but that's exactly what we have to do, and a lot of people's minds won't let them do that because they don't like to lie to themselves.
Just in case I didn't finish my last thought. Because my grades were so high, it was enough to compensate that I had bad spelling, at least back when I was younger. I'm not sure if my spelling's so bad now, but okay.
Okay. Incidentally, that book's on Amazon. Or you could just Google, you know, the 3,000 most commonly used words. But even, I'll just show you my speed. Don't pay attention to none of this stuff. But if I can see it looking through it, you know, I can't see it. But I would say old boat, you know, of Ohio football. None of these words are really that hard to spell. But, you know, Ohio law degree for old. You know, Ohio's Lower Youngstown.
I probably would go Ohio and then Lorain Yahoo Mail there, whatever that's worth. But I was actually looking through the phone as I am now, and I couldn't really see those words. I'm looking through it now. Like DD, I use Daffy Dan. Some of you might remember those T-shirt. FF, anytime I got FF, it's Flatfoot Frank, you know. And then, you know, let's say TEN, assuming I'm seeing that right. It would just be Twinsburg, Ohio electric nurse, which is just a fancy way of saying electrician. I don't, incidentally, I don't belong to that fellowship. I use that a lot, like Cocaine Anonymous, Emotional Anonymous. I do that stuff a lot, where A is the second letter.
I would probably go Yahoo Mail. I'd probably break it up in a correct syllable. But you get my point. I've been doing this for years, so I could zip through this like nothing, Nashville University Railroad, and then 7-Eleven for nurse. Nut. I can't. I'm looking through the screen. I can't see this. But Nashville University.
And notice what I'm doing. Do you notice a pattern of how the first letter is only a person or place? Generally, not always, but generally. That's why I don't get confused. And there is no confusion. And there doesn't need to be any confusion for yourself either. If the first letter can only be a certain thing, like, and the other letters can only be a car or a dog, you can't get confused. It's impossible.
University of Toledo. Sometimes I don't break them up exactly right, but you see my pattern,
Sorry about the blurry screen here, folks. I there's nothing I can do about that. It'll clean up, that book's so small, and I'm just making this with making this with an iPhone, so just bear through the slop where it is. It'll clean up.
Even like TH, Twinsburg High School, let's say, or even teacher. I would use, I'm not a member of Emotional Anonymous, but, I would say Twinsburg Emotional Anonymous, Chanel High School. Boom, done.
Don't forget the emergency room.
Twisted Energy out of Twinsburg, Ohio, Long Linda Division.
And incidentally, that symbol, Twisted Energy, there's a T, right? Anytime I'm making a symbol, I'll make my second letter smaller than the first one. So I'd put that T, and I'd put one of the T's here, or E's there, and one below the T. It's twisted. It's not right across, but that's a little bit, let's say, beyond the scope of this video.
Right there, tour, Ohio University Railroad, if I got my finger on it. Anyway, enough of that. Enough of that. Okay, we're almost at 18 minutes. Again, going back to the practical, let's say you're taking a test, and you said, what is, because my hand's in front of you, what is the radius bone? And you're lacking sleep, and let's say you have 2 kids at home, and your car's barely running, and the whole 9 yards, and you're trying to get through anatomy and physiology. I just look at it, Richfield athletic director, and I make it make sense. Let's say, I really liked my high school track coach, and he was very encouraging, and a lot of people liked him. And, right there, he's giving you a thumbs up. Ulner. Usually I go Uruguay.
What just all that means is the thumb is on the side of the radius. That's the only point I was trying to make. So if you take a test, you go Richfield athletic director, you imagine you went to Richfield High School, your track coach is giving you a thumbs up, that's the radial bone. And when you're looking at it for the test, Richfield athletic director, it'd come right back to you.
But sometimes I go university library, and if you're at the library and you're like me, and you got one pen in the book to keep this page, and one pen in the back to have a back reference page, and you're short on pens, you're going to put your pinky finger in the area where, let's say, the works cited page was, and I specifically remember doing this. So when I take the test, they'll say, what is the, I guess, no, I might have pronounced that wrong a second ago, university library. Oh, yeah, that's the bone on, let's say, the pinky side, All right. And let's just do a little bonus footage, as Ivan from Pine Hollow Automotive likes to say. When I'm doing like say storing information in a car, some of you might remember on the old, let's say, Monte Carlos, where they had the thing on the hoods.
I meant to say a hood ornament. And incidentally, if I mention somebody on here, that guy's so well known and he promotes his YouTube channel, I don't feel guilty about mentioning his name, if that makes sense.
My 1, the 2 headlights are the 2, the 3 fan blades are the 3, the 4 cylinders, 5 lug nuts, and so on. 6-pack of water, 7 iron in the back.
A 7 iron that would be laid between 2 bucket seats. You see how that makes a number 7. That's supposed to be a car there, folks. Let me get my cursor. You know, that's the hood ornament. There's the 2 tires. There's the 3 fan blades. The 5 lug nuts should be around here where the cursive is. And the 6-pack of water or whatever you're drinking is here. The 7 iron would be between the 2 seats. All right. I'm going to start it back up.
8 with the spare tires, and then with the human body, I do the same thing, you know. Keep in mind, I'm looking through a camera, you know. 2 would be my eyes, 3 would be the bumps on the nose, 4 would be the 4 canines, 5 would be, let's say, the commissure of the lip along the wet line, down the mental tuberosity. Is that mental something? I don't know what that's called, the chin. Anyway, it makes a 5, 6 is the voice box, 7 is, let's say, hero.
Across the sternum, across the shoulder blade, makes a number 7. And incidentally, if that was my teacher, let's say her name was Sue, she'd be driving a Subaru, okay? And I got over 26 stations on the human body, okay? And let's say 26 on the Subaru, okay? And to make the math easy, let's just call it 50, okay? You know, 25 plus 25 is 50, right? Okay, you're not going to have to know more than 50 things, even for a PhD, folks. So, you know, and then you got the power of acronyms, you got the power of Greg Shorthand, you got the power of American Sign Language, you got the power of the major system. You're unstoppable. Whatever you want to do, you can do.
Along the clavicle, you get the point. 8 is the belly button. 10 would be the.
And incidentally, what type of dog would the Sue be walking? A Saint Bernard. What type of cigarette would she be smoking? Salem's. And I'm not looking at anything, folks. What would be her favorite ride at the amusement park? A slide. What is the animal she's most scared of? A snake. You know, if you take a little time here and there to have a few alphabet lists, it's just easy, easy, easy.
Toes, you know, so that's just.
The toes are 10, back of the calves are 11, and so on. And incidentally, the back of the shoulder blade is 14 because it's shaped like a. Is that the scapula? I might be wrong on that. I should know that. I'm just going to let it go. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But anyway, you get my point. The back of the shoulder, one of the bones is similar to a number 4. And I might have had that wrong. I'm just talking off the cuff.
Bonus footage, but we will stay on topic. Okay. 20. I'm trying to finish this video in 30 minutes. That's just more examples of how, you know, that's all done for me. Anytime I got a BT, it's Bluetooth, Arts and Entertainment. That's actually been changed to Irish Elevator, but it used to be Internet Explorer. Ellis Island, Mary Black has that wonderful song. This is the last call for Ellis Island. Obviously, I used Ohio State, and I talked about before how I use RN for registered nurse, and a lot of them I recycled. Okay, we are staying on point. So again, the first thing we talked about, what I recommend you do is have a acronym for every letter of, 2 letters of the alphabet. If you're too lazy to do that, you can just skip right to Greg Shorthand. Okay? Again, you see how these are the voice and unvoice. R, L, N, M. That's why they're similar. Let's just say K, G, P, B. Those are lip poppers. T and D I talked about earlier. How the tip of your tongue touches the palate. Small, T, D. You might want to watch a video on Greg Shorthand because I'm moving so fast. The point I'm trying to make is you can look at a word, and even if you only use the first 3 letters, the symbols are going to give you the answer. I remember when I was in school, that's a symbol for R. That's more like L. R is like that. L is like that. But it's a Nike symbol. That gave me the answer. There was no more studying. And again, you'll say this won't work for me. I cannot stress enough. You're going to have the word in front of you, so it's impossible to mess it up. F and V, and I'll give you, there I use an Irish pub, F and B, I got let's say,
I think I should have said P and B there. I might have said F, but P and B are the lip poppers, and I just used the word pub to lock that in. At least I did when I was younger, but now I know them.
The word favor, should Church John.
Or should Church John, or should he go to the gym? Notice I guess you would call it a soft G, but in Greg shorthand, soft G like Jim is they would use the same symbol as J, I believe. I could be wrong about that. Like I said, I'm no master Greg shorthand person. I'm just pretty good at the alphabet.
Like I said, you can watch a video on that. But you get my mnemonics to lock those in: king, and let's say ra and la, real lady.
The word no more for N and M. This is, I don't use this anymore, but back when I was first using it, I did. F and B, those are two together. Fa and va. I would call that the voiced, and I would call V the on-voice. But I could have those backwards. I'm not a speech pathologist, folks. So fa and va, but you see the similar, and it follows a pattern, which you can, kick it back a few seconds and look, but we're not going to do that.
I said, should Church John, favor. T and D, I use touchdown. Okay, enough of that. You might want to watch a better video on YouTube about Greg shorthand. And keep in mind, I'm not saying you need to learn Greg shorthand. I'm just recommending learning the alphabet. We're going to go on to the major system. And again, I would watch a video on that. You could just YouTube major system, a.k.a. phonetic numbering system. It'll come right up on Google search or YouTube. Right there it is. Right there it is. And for you perceptive people, doesn't that follow the same system as Greg shorthand? That's a video in itself. But that's what you call 2 for 1. You're darn right it does. It follows the exact same pattern.
And you know what? And I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but I've listened to a lot of memory experts, and I have heard nobody in my whole life that ever mentioned that the major system and Greg shorthand follows the same pattern. I mean, it's kind of obvious. Maybe that's why no one ever mentioned it. But even if you skip everything else I said and just use the major system and Greg shorthand, it'll increase your life and your, let's say, ability to get high grades by at least 10%.
P and B are 9. Let's say a favor for, let's just say Philip for purposes of conversation. Again, should Church John, and I'm leaving some of them out, soft G and DG, I know that. Okay, the same thing with R, right there. I mean, it doesn't match up exactly, but close enough. Okay, we're on a different subject. We're on the major system now. Okay, this is simply the phonetic alphabet. I don't like that word secret. That's actually from Jerry Lucas's book. I just want to be on the up and up on that. Let you read that for yourself. Okay, vowels do not count in this system. I think it says double letters don't count. I can't see through this video recorder. And WHY doesn't count. I think it says silent letters, and I don't want...
See, a good mental lock-in, you could say, well, why not? You know what I mean? And why don't we use vowels? And that's pretty much it. Everything else counts except WH and Y and vowels, and double letters and silent letters may not count.
I want to look because of time. Okay, that's another lock-in, right? First one I would recommend is the acronym system. This one, this is another book. Jerry Lucas did this. Nelson Dellis did this. Same system. He's just giving you clues on how to lock them in. One is T and D, which is a downward stroke. The N has 2 downward strokes. M has 3 downward strokes. R is the last letter in 4. 5, I think they use the hand. Yeah, the hand makes a letter L. 6, just giving you examples. K turn, let's say, sideways makes 2 7s turn sideways makes a K.
Or two 7s offset makes a number 7 is probably what I meant to say there.
8, F kind of makes the letter 8 in the cursive form. And let's just say a 9 flip backwards is a P or a B.
Or let's correctly say upside down would be a more accurate statement. But here we go.
Pretty sure that's what he's saying. I hope this is coming through for you. You can buy that book from Nelson Dellis or any other memory book. Any memory book's going to talk about the major system.
I should say any memory book that's worth its salt, let's say. Okay.
And that's what you come up with. So if I said, what is Lily? Well, I know, I'm not even looking. It's 55. Let's just run through the double numbers. 11 is tot, right? 22 is none, right?
You could also use dad there. Let's say going to Wendy's to get tater tots. And that's generally what I do. And you would say at 11 p.m. Again, I learned that from other memory experts. So you triple lock it in. And if you knew an athlete, you could say they go together. If you knew an athlete, which I do, like somebody like John Elway if we were doing number 7, or Ray Guy if we were doing number 8.
Right? 33 is Mummy. I'm not looking, right? 44 is Warrior. 55 is Lily. 66 is Choo Choo. 77 is Cake. 88 is Fife. 90.
And incidentally, I would use Flatfoot Frank that played in 1988 at Florida, let's say high school or Florida College, wherever your mind would go. So it's not only Fife, it's Flatfoot Frank that played the fife. And why was he flat-footed? Because he wanted to be a master, and he stood for too long, let's say, and he became flat-footed. There are a lot of those stories have triple lock-ins. So it's not only cake for 77, it's Lyle Zato eating a cake, which he used to do. He would you can ask any Raiders player, he would sit in his hotel room and eat chocolate cake and milk. Maybe not the best idea before you go to sleep. And I'm not trying to pick on Lyle Zato, but you want to control your food a little bit. It's not easy, believe me, I know. Sometimes I'll mark in my little index card that I carry, if I have something to eat, I'll say no food till 2 o'clock. Do you see what I'm saying? And I'll try my best to stick to it. I don't have the let's say, drive of a monk, but Lyle Zato had a lot of rage in him. And maybe part of that rage came from not being able to control his eating. Who knows? Again, I'm not trying to cut the guy down. At his core, he was a good person. But, all right, we're going to start this back up.
9 is, let's just say, you could use Pope or pipe is fine. And if you want to learn these, just, like 1, tie, or let me go to the double letters, like.
What I mean by that is, and it's worth repeating, and this is probably one of the top 3 points I'm making in this whole video. You see, Noah. 3 is Ma. So you could say, let's say you were a young machinist and you had to take a test, and using a broach, how much does a broach take off when you're sending it through, let's say, a press, arbor press, assuming I'm saying that right? 3,000. So you say, your mom's going to encourage you, or let's say Ma, M-A, 3,000s. You look, well, it's gone, but, 3 is Ma, I'm positive, and 4 is rye, as in rye bread, and 5 is law, but right there. Okay, so you say, how does this help you? Right there, you get that right on the test. So how many thousands does a broach take off with each the test question would be with which each progressive, let's say, tooth pattern. Now, I don't know the answer to that. It's either 3,000s with all the teeth going through, but it's probably 3,000 per tooth. Okay, you get that right, okay? Okay, here's another. Let's say you're a welder, right? And you're using the major system, and you know it, 6010 rod's a fast freeze rod. And all you do is look at the last two numbers, and it's toes. Your toes are your extremities. They're going to freeze fast. A 7018 welding rod, I believe it's meant to dig in. Well, 18 is dive, the dive of Peyton Manning. You know, he's going to dig in hard, which he did, and he's in the Hall of Fame, which he deserves to be. There you go. Got it right. Got it right. Boom. Don't tell anybody I was a pipe welder, by the way, because my phone would ring off the hook. All right, we're going to start this up.
34. Meyer. Pronounce them. It almost give you the answer. Like,
don't let that slip by, folks. It's too much work. 34. Even if you just know the number. Meyer. Mack truck. Let's see. 3 is M and 7 is K. Mack. Mafia. And you could lock that in easily with a 38, let's say caliper, and even mop, 39 cents discount at wherever you're shopping. Let's just say Target. Mop.
Mack truck. Mafia. Mop.
And some of these numbers can be two things at the same time, if that makes sense. Because like Pope and pipe, you can get two words out of them, not all of them.
Fan is what? 82. All right, let me show you something really quick. Again, bonus footage. Let's just hypothetically say you were taking a test, and the spelling of the word was fan, F-A-M. Again, my first letter.
I think I said F-A-M, which I should have said F-A-N. Sorry about that, but that I probably was tired. I generally, even now, it's late right now. For some reason, I have a tendency to make these videos late. And I am human too, by the way, so I do make mistakes.
Can only be Florida or Felicia or let's say Frank. So we'll say Florida's.
Notice my pattern. My first letter can only be two things, two people or a place. Again, that's enough to start the ball moving, and that's enough to settle the mind, and the mind does the rest, fills in the gaps.
We'll just say Florida's automotive nurse. Okay, well, fan equals 82 in the major system. When do fans come on? Roughly speaking, 82 degrees. That would give the answer.
Assuming that word fan was a complicated, let's say, word for, I don't know, brain and cognition class, or healthcare ethics, or some type of psychology class, you know what I mean? So I'm not looking at the word fan necessarily. I'm just using that as an example because it's simple. When do fans come on? 82 degrees. And I'll talk about, then I'll use in my hand. Acronym, Florida Automotive Nurse, Greg Shorthand, which I'll show you in a second. F, I believe that's F for American Sign Language. And sure enough, sometimes they don't come through that much. And I probably would skip A, and I probably would just use N. Well, if you look at a fan on the window, there's a little button that can reverse the, let's say, direction of the fan, you see. And it just gives you more information, you see. And the major system, as we're talking about right now, is 82 for fan. Okay.
Fan. Okay, that's Greg's shorthand. If you grab that little bitty thing hanging and move that thing like that, it would provide, let's say, an air, which again would give you the answer. That's, 3 things. It's impossible to fail a test, right? That's the message I'm giving. Use acronyms, Greek shorthand, American Sign Language, the major system, and flip it back if you have no other options. Okay, I think that's it. I'll shut it down. Hey, I made it. Under 30 minutes. Shutting it down.
Okay, that video is over, and I want to show you one more thing. I was going to show you two things, but I changed my mind because of the jumpingness. Now, you might say that I'm changing subjects, but I'm not. You see that pillow? Okay, you might say, that's a pretty skinny pillow, and you're right. Do you know why I sleep on a pillow that thin? Because I had to master a way to sleep in hotels where I could mimic the same size pillow. So I started using the hotel towels, and I grabbed the 2 pillowcases. Right? So what's this got to do with Greg shorthand or let's say memory of everything I've been talking about the last hour? Well, I found a way to make something work, okay? I didn't like sleeping on these hotel pillows that were as big as, let's say, balloons, and I had to sleep in the corner of it, and I could never get a good night's sleep. And when I was traveling long distance on a bicycle or in a car, so eventually I got the bright idea to just use the bathroom towels. Now, what's that got to do with, what's that got to do with the price of coffee at the local restaurant? Well, you just keep spinning stuff until you get the answer. That's all. And that's why I talked, even when I talked about flipping it back, sometimes I have to do that. But the point I'm trying to make is if you work hard enough, 99, not always, but high 98, 97 per time, you'll find a way to figure stuff out. Okay, I'm going to close it out.